Welcome to the Lion's Roar podcast, from the publishers of Lion's Roar magazine and Buddha Dharma, the Practitioner's Quarterly. I'm Sandra Hannebohm. This week's podcast is sponsored by St. John's College, where great books and great discussions are the heart of their distinctive liberal arts program. Rick Hanson is a psychologist and author of Neurodharma, New Science, Ancient Wisdom, and 7 Practices of the Highest Happiness. Today, Lion's Roar's Chris Pacheco asks Dr. Hanson about neurodharma and the lessons therein, how the brain works, how it can physically change from intentional practice over time, and a 5-minute practice to show how you can use your mind to change your brain, to change your mind for the better.
Rick, welcome. It's great to have you here.
Thanks, Chris. Yeah, definitely. I have a lot of warm feelings for Lion's Roar as a magazine and as an organization, and I feel honored, really, honestly, to be able to hang out with you here.
Well, we appreciate all you do. You know, your work is very important, especially right now during these times. So thank you. Your newest book, Neurodharma, it's subtitled New Science, Ancient Wisdom, and the 7 Practices of the Highest Happiness. It's a very intriguing title, and it opens up a lot of questions. Perhaps we can start with you explaining what it all means. What's the new science? What ancient wisdom? Why is it important? And what exactly are the 7 practices? Would you be able to go into some depth as to what it's all about?
Oh, definitely. And I want to really emphasize that I'm a methods guy. I'm a practice guy. I'm really interested in the science, but for example, the Buddha, he was interested in what is true, but he was much more interested in what is useful. In other words, what works. I was just reading some of his teachings the other night, and I came across, the well-known saying that he said, "I teach just one thing, suffering and its end." And so it's in the spirit of that. I'll just read the first opening paragraphs to the book, which kind of set up the whole topic. So here we go. I've hiked a lot in the mountains, and sometimes a friend farther up the trail has turned and looked back and encouraged me onward. Such a friendly gesture. Come join me. Watch out for the slippery ice. I've often thought about those moments while writing this book, which is about the heights of human potential, about being as wise and strong, happy and loving as any person can ever be. If those heights are like a great mountain, awakening is the magnificent journey that carries you along toward the top. Many real people have gone very far up, the great sages and teachers throughout history, as well as others no one has heard about, and I imagine them turning with a sweet smile and beckoning us to join them. Those who have climbed this mountain come from different cultures and have different personalities, but they all seem alike to me in 7 ways. They are mindful. They are kind. They live with contentment and emotional balance through even the hardest times. They are whole and authentic. They are present here and now. They speak of feeling connected with everything, and a light shines through them that does not seem entirely their own. Remarkably, you can see some of these qualities, even all of these qualities, deep down inside yourself, even if they're sometimes covered over by stresses and distractions. These ways of being are not reserved for the few. They are opportunities for all of us, and we can explore them in these 7 practices of awakening: steadying the mind, warming the heart, resting in fullness, being wholeness, receiving nowness, opening into allness, and finding timelessness. There are many traditions which are like many routes up the mountain of awakening. Nonetheless, on each of these routes, we find the same steps taken again and again, steps of steadiness, lovingness, fullness, wholeness, nowness, allness, and timelessness. This is some of the most profound and perhaps sacred territory there is. It is ultimately beyond science and logic. So words about it can be loose, metaphorical, and poetic. The complete development of these 7 ways of being marks the pinnacle of human possibility, which could be called enlightenment or full awakening. Meanwhile, Even the first simple sense of them is very useful in everyday life. For instance, while dealing with stressful challenges, it's so good to rest in the fullness of feeling already peaceful, happy, and loved. And whether it is for the beginning of the path or its end, today we have an unprecedented opportunity to explore a kind of reverse engineering of awakening that is grounded in the living body. So that's
I
the
love it.
introduction. That's the basic idea. It's like I'm a longtime rock climber, and I'll do a thing where I'll watch people who are better than I am, and I'll go, "Ooh, how do they do that?" Right? And how do you move it like a human gecko across the cliff? And then I'll just kind of feel my way into it and help that way of being kind of become more established in me as I become more established in it, and then whoop, I start climbing better. In much the same way, as I said in the opening line, we can observe people who are really far along in present times or throughout history. We can feel their energy, their transmission, their vibe. We can hear their words. We can track their coaching. They're coaching us. They're telling us, hey, this is how to do it, right? I did it. It's cool. Here's how you can do it too, in your own way, in your own time, in your own place, for your own needs, right? And so we can study these people and then kind of, like I said, reverse engineer. We can kind of model them. We can understand what it's like to be them. And we can help ourselves increasingly grow into that way of being. And to finish the point, these days, with modern science, we have tools that were unavailable 2,500 years ago when the Buddha first walked the earth, or thousands of years before him even, when people were still practicing deeply. We now increasingly understand what's actually happening in your brain, in your body, when on the one hand, you're stressed out and pissed off. On the other hand, we're starting to learn more and more and more what's happening in your brain, what the actual circuits are that underlie feeling present and centered and resilient and open-hearted and fundamentally content deep down inside yourself, even while grappling with serious challenges. And this means then that we can increasingly learn how to use our minds to work the circuitry, to activate the systems in the brain. We can use our mind to change our brain, which then in turn will change our mind for the better, for our own sake and that of all beings. And that's an incredible opportunity.
And when I hear you explain it, and correct me if I'm wrong, I get the sense that it's less of doing things and more of just being, a complete being in all that you do. Is that correct?
That's a great way to put it. I think there are two great modes of practice, being and working. In a sense, being is more fundamental, but we can't just be. And again, if we could just drop in, like, yeah, let's all just drop into enlightenment, just pure loving kindness radiating in all directions, no matter what happens around us. Good luck with that. If you could just do that, great. I'd send my bows your way. But most of us need to practice. Yeah. And we need to practice in part because, frankly, it's a physical system deep down that needs to change. I mean, all of our thoughts and feelings rest in underlying physical processes, and they have a kind of inertia to them. We really do need to help the brain change for the better. And as a quick sidebar, it's important to take into account the ways that our brain has what's called a negativity bias. It's designed to look for bad news, overreact to it, and overlearn from it. That's what helped our ancestors make it through the Stone Age, or even before that, Jurassic Park. But today, that negativity bias, much of the time, creates a lot of unnecessary suffering. And it functions as a kind of bottleneck in our brain that makes it harder to heal and grow and develop. Okay, so we gotta make some effort here. There's this combination, right, of gradual cultivation, sudden awakening, gradual cultivation, as they say in Tibet. So for me, it's kind of twofold. If you think about the first of the 7 qualities that we find in awakened beings, and this is my system, there might be other systems, but I think that's pretty down to earth, actually, when you think about these 7 qualities, and you can feel in yourself. Let's just take the first one, steadying your mind, right? Sustaining present moment mindfulness. In fact, getting control of your attention. Attention is like a spotlight in a vacuum cleaner. It illuminates what it rests upon and then sucks it into you, sucks it into your brain through what's called experience-dependent neuroplasticity, which is really a mouthful, right? But the point is, As the Buddha said a long time ago, your mind takes its shape from what it repeatedly rests upon. Good news, bad news, right? So bad news, you repeatedly dwell in a sense of resentment and anxiety and inadequacy. Well, that's going to gradually get hardwired into your body, into your nervous system. On the other hand, if you deliberately steady your mind enough to sustain attention to a sense of your own innate goodness or a fundamental gritty moxie, that was really underrated, I think, as an important psychological resource, gritty moxie. If you rest your mind on compassion for other people, even if they're irritating, and compassion certainly for yourself, even if you're not yet perfect, if you rest your mind there, well, that's what gradually gets wired into your own living circuitry. And you begin to dwell there increasingly yourself. So there's a little bit of effort to it. So that's why studying the mind is fundamental, because if you don't have control over your attention, you don't have control over your mind, and you don't have control over your life. Ba-bum, pure and simple. So there are things we can do to develop steadiness of mind. For example, research shows in your brain that you can gradually build up circuitry in a part of your brain called the anterior cingulate cortex that exercises top-down control over your attention. You can deliberately steady that and build up that kind of muscle. You can really do that. Also, with greater steadiness of mind and greater training, you can have more and more of a sense of your body as a whole and things as a whole. And that holistic awareness, that sense of things as a whole, helps to quiet the inner chatter inside yourself and the tendency to jump into the future or dwell on the past, and in so doing brings you more and more into the present. That simple sense of being as a whole, and research also shows that as you do that, you gradually build up circuits in your brain, particularly the right hemisphere for right-handed people, because that's where the sense of holistic processing lives. The broader point is that little things you do every day add up to big changes. Little bits. A little bit of meditation here, a lot of mindfulness there, spread out over the course of your day. Each day, you're gradually changing your brain for the better. Those individual changes might be small on a particular day, but day after day, month after month, year after year, you can really make a big difference because your brain associates. There's this classic saying, neurons that fire together, wire together. So if you're aware of two things at the same time, the positive will associate to the negative and link to it, in other words, and gradually heal it. Most of the time, it's really fast. There you are, and you're just having like a good moment. It's authentic. It's real. You're not trying to ignore the bad. If anything, growing the strengths inside through cultivation, as I've described, makes you more able to deal with the bad out there in the world and whatever you're grappling with inside yourself. This is not a spiritual bypass. This is not positive thinking. I don't believe in that stuff. It's realistic thinking. It's recognizing what's valuable and not wasting it on your brain. Actually, you want to hear the 5-minute challenge?
At Lion's Roar, we're always looking forward to our next great discussion. That's something we share with the students and faculty at St. John's College, the sponsor of this week's episode. The Graduate Institute at St. John's College in Santa Fe, New Mexico, is for students seeking a lifelong commitment to thoughtful, collaborative inquiry into fundamental human questions. The Master of Arts in Eastern Classics examines the core literary, philosophical, and theological works of India, China, and Japan. In small discussion-based classes, students delve into the richness of Asian traditions and study classical Chinese or Sanskrit. This 3-semester program offers both online and on-campus options, so join this vibrant community of learners from all walks of life and learn more about St. John's Master of Arts in Eastern Classics at sjc.edu/lion. That'll take you directly to the program page.
5 minutes. Right? You could do this, Chris. Maybe you'll come back and you'll let me know how it goes. A handful of times each day, take in the good. There's a good moment here, a nice thing there, a moment of beauty, a moment of relief, a moment of feeling your own gritty capabilities. Slow down for a breath or two feel it in your body, and focus on what feels good about it. That will activate these neural factors that intensify growth, intensify learning. Okay? That's part one of the 5-minute challenge. That'll take you about a minute a day, spread out over your day. All right, anybody can do it, even in a really, really difficult life. The harder your life is, the more important it is to focus on self-reliance in these ways and growing the good inside yourself. Okay. Second, have one thing in particular that you're trying to develop inside yourself these days. One particular strength, or maybe one particular kind of nutrient, psychological nutrient, that you know is really important to you. Given my own background as a kind of shy, rejected kid, it was really important for me. The special food for me, my nutrient, was to feel included and just recognized by other people. Just simple, but that was missing for me a lot when I was a kid. So, if you know what your own particular special nutrient is, or the particular strength you're trying to grow, like more patience maybe, or more understanding of other people, whatever it might be, focus on that one over the course of the day. A minute here, a minute there adds up to 2-3 minutes a day. To slow down, to try to have experiences of it, and then really, really value it. That's high value experience, right? And then the third aspect of the 5-minute challenge, so I have 2 minutes left, I think, in my 5-minute challenge, is before you go to bed every day, deliberately marinate in what I call deep green, a deep feeling that's authentic to you of calming and contentment and love. Just this is our home base. This is where we naturally reset to or default to when we're not troubled, when we're not stressed, when in the moment, in the present, we don't feel like we're running for our life. And so you can help yourself come home to deep green because we spend so much of our day in a kind of inner homelessness, disturbed out of and cast out from this inherent natural home base. And so that's it. That's the 5-minute challenge. Just 5 minutes. Everyone can do it, but it would make an enormous difference.
I love it. I think it's very practical and it's very realistic. And I really liked you mentioning the moving from states to traits and experiencing to learning, because I know I find this in my life that we just move from one thing to the next. We're always just trying to do the next thing, and we never really take time to just experience what we're doing. We get caught up in the day-to-day, the hectic life, kids, family, troubles, whatever it is. And it's very easy to just almost go through life sleepwalking. So I think that's a crucial, very important thing that you brought up.
The deep point here has to do with what are we trying to grow? Okay. And for sure, slowing down to smell the roses is really worth doing in its own right. I'm all for that. But what really motivates me here has to do with what are we trying to grow inside? How are we trying to help ourselves develop? Not because there's something wrong with us as we are, and so forth, but clearly in the path of awakening, right? In the path of practice, we're trying to help ourselves develop in various ways. And so the question then becomes, how do we actually grow those strengths inside? And what I've talked about here, grounded in good science, actually, is the specific how, the 2-step process with the necessary second step that gradually really does hardwire the good inside yourself.
There's a section in the book about changing the brain with meditation. So I would love to talk about how the brain changes during meditation. What are the effects afterwards, if any? What's the science behind it? And, what's exactly happening as we become more mindful, more present, and more aware in our life?
Oh, great stuff. Well, one thing that's really cool is that in terms of research on how mental activity changes the brain, particularly for the better, right? There's been a lot of research on how our experiences can change the brain for the worse, like trauma, depression, anxiety, things like that, addiction. But the research on how our experiences, our mental activities, can change the brain for the better has actually focused mainly on meditation, which is pretty trippy, actually, to think about it. Like, why meditation? Well, a lot of the neuroscientists into this are meditators, whether it's TM, particularly some decades ago, and increasingly, mainly Buddhist-y, I'll call it like that, mindfulness practice, which is not inherently Buddhist, but it's it's been its historical origins. So netting it all out, I'll tell you a little bit of an overview, kind of fast here. So the brain, right? It's like 3 pounds of tofu-like tissue. It's sort of blobby. It doesn't look like much. It looks kind of like rotten cauliflower, if you expose it. And yet, many scientists would consider it to be the most complicated object currently known to science, more complicated even in some ways than an exploding star. It's got roughly, and you can be aware of it right now as you listen, it's got roughly 85 billion or so neurons amidst another 100 billion or so support cells altogether. And now just talking about the neurons, a typical neuron makes several thousand connections called synapses with other neurons. Well, that gives us a network inside our head, our own internal web inside our head with several 100 trillion little microprocessors all sparkling away many, many times a second with synchronized activity spreading across millions, if not billions of them that are vibrating together harmoniously dozens of times a second, producing brainwaves. All right. So all this activity is going on, and the brain is 2 to 3% of body weight, and yet it's still using 20 to 25% of the oxygen and glucose circulating in your blood as it supplies. It's cooking. It's really busy. Like why would Mother Nature evolve over 600 million years of the evolution of the nervous system? 600 million years of evolution, in which in the last just several million years, the brain has tripled in its size. It's gotten 3 times bigger than it was several million years ago when our ancestors first began using tools to make tools, our hominid ancestors in Africa. Anyway, why would Mother Nature invest so much, right? It's using a quarter of your supplies. What? Even though it's just 2 to 3% of your body. Well, because it's so important. It's processing information, and the brain is helping us take actions for survival purposes, which a lot involve our relationships with other people, because we evolved as hunter-gatherers in profoundly social bands whose survival was intimately dependent upon what everybody else was doing here. So we've got this hunk of equipment, as it were, kind of biological equipment, cooking away, firing away. And one of the very fundamental principles in it is that as it's processing information, that's its fundamental function, it's designed to learn from the information flowing through it. For example, in the saying I quoted earlier from the work of the Canadian psychologist Donald Hebb in the last century, in the 1940s and 1950s, neurons that fire together wire together. So if you do something repeatedly, let's say positively, like you repeatedly practice mindfulness, you're kind of calming, you're centering, you're coming into the present, you're being with your experience, it's passing along, you're not struggling with anything and you're not following after anything, you're staying here, maybe with a deepening sense of stability and steadiness, maybe also, let's say, deliberately with a warming of your heart, which helps steadiness and brings all kinds of other values too. That's one of the 7 practices I was talking about in Neurodharma, warming the heart with compassion and kindness, including for yourself. Let's say you're doing that. Well, the particular neurons, the particular circuits that are involved, or networks that are involved in those activities, are going to get more active. They're starting to fire more, and therefore they're going to start wiring more. And that wiring happens, literally, new little tendrils start extending and forming new synapses and connections between neurons that are firing at the same time. Also, existing connections can become stronger. Major networks or groups of neurons start forming coalitions. They start working together better to help you better. Brainwave patterns change. Also, there are increases or changes in flows of neurotransmitters, these sort of tidal currents sloshing around, not exactly, inside your brain as you become calmer and stronger and happier and wiser. So all this is happening really quite dynamically. And then I can name, if you like, 4 research-based ways in which the brains of people who have kind of a long-term meditative or mindfulness practice actually change for the better. You want me to kind of name the four things?
I think that'd be great, especially our audience. A lot of them are meditators, or even for the new meditators, it'd be helpful for them to see, what's this practice doing for them, not only in a spiritual way, but in a chemistry way, a brain changing way.
Yeah.
That'd be very useful, I think. Yeah.
Okay, great. So first of four major changes that are found is increased structure and improved function in the parts of the brain that regulate attention. It's like I said earlier about studying the mind. If you can't control your attention, you can't control your life, right? You're just all over the place. And so those circuits tend to be involved behind the forehead, where the executive systems in the brain are primarily located in your prefrontal cortex, and also in a part of the brain called as I said earlier, the anterior, which just means frontal cingulate cortex. This is a part of the brain that's toward the front and kind of a couple inches down from the top, if you will, toward the middle. And that part of the brain, which gives you a lot of good top-down control over your attention, tends to become strengthened and also better functionally connected with more ancient parts of your brain that are emotionally reactive and can kind of send you all over the place. And these top-down systems start having enhanced regulatory control over those underlying parts of the brain in the subcortex, like the amygdala, say, the alarm bell of the brain, that can get really reactive. So there's better top-down control. Second major change has to do with emotional regulation, just kind of like I was saying, both in terms of improved executive, prefrontal, top-down control over those more ancient subcortical systems that developed a couple 100 million years ago or first began emerging. So in fact, some of them we share with advanced reptiles. It's kind of like the inner crocodile. In part, it's pretty simple stuff. It's not bad. It really helps us in a lot of ways, but we do need to, regulate it. And also, there are other forms of emotional regulation that improve as well, including in these more ancient systems. For example, the hippocampus, a part of the brain that helps to regulate the amygdala, this alarm bell of the brain. The hippocampus tends to build neural tissue in long-term meditators, which gives us both the benefit of being able to grow and learn even more, because the hippocampus is very involved with growing and learning, which is kind of cool, right? You actually enhance your capacity to learn from your experiences as you progress in your meditative practice. And also the hippocampus inhibits the amygdala, kind of calms it down. Yo, alarm bell. It's okay. It's good. Thanks.
It's a win-win.
Thanks. We got it. It's okay. Yeah, that's right. Okay. So that's second major kind of change, emotional regulation. Third, body awareness. Very often, it's not the only way to meditate, but classic mindfulness practice, and you find this in other traditions as well that are not Buddhist, and certainly secular traditions, you can have a growing sense of your own body. Through what's called interoception, you're tuning into the internal sensations of the chest rising and falling, say, as you breathe, or you're kind of tracking the deeper layers of your psyche, your gut feelings, which do involve the gut in some ways. Well, a key part of the brain called the insula is very involved with interoception. And people can just play with this right now if they want. As you just inhale, maybe through your nose, notice that the inhalation is cooler than the exhalation. You can just feel it. And you can also feel your chest rising and falling. Right there, you're engaging your insula. And as you engage the insula, since neurons that fire together wire together, you're actually building connections there. And you're bringing more blood through the capillaries to that part of your brain because you're working that muscle more and more. So it literally gets bigger. It becomes measurably bigger. The insula does. And there are two of them technically on both sides of the brain. Well, as you deepen in body awareness and you build up circuitry, you build up structure and you improve function in, let's say, the insula, this part of your brain, it gives you the benefit of helping you be more in touch with yourself, more tuned in to yourself. And the insula is the seat of empathy for the emotions of others. It helps you become more empathic to other people as you build up your insula. And super cool, naturally, when you start activating the insula and you engage this internal interoception of what it's like to be you in this moment, what the insula does is act as a kind of circuit breaker on another part of the brain, another region basically, called the default mode network, which is in the midline of your cortex. If you draw your finger across your forehead, from the middle of the top of your forehead all the way toward the back, roughly halfway back and then spreading loosely to the sides, is this so-called default mode network, which is kind of like the inner ruminator. It's where we go when we're just spacing out, mind is wandering, or we're obsessing about things. We're rehashing conversations. We're kind of with a lot of sense of me, myself, and I. There's a lot of suffering going on in the ruminator, grounded in the ruminator there. And so if you activate your insula by tuning into your internal sensations or just drawing upon it, the insula stops activity. It disrupts activity in the default mode network, which helps you come into the present and disengage from the various negative emotions that we tend to be prone to. A lot of research shows this. As people's minds wander, so also tend to increase negative emotions. So that's a third major benefit. And then a fourth major change in the brains of long-term meditators, which supports a benefit, is a more spacious sense of self. The sense of self becomes less contracted and solidified as me, myself, and my precious, right? We get uptight. There's a place for a sense of self sometimes, especially when you need to mobilize a strong forcefulness in yourself to speak truth to power at all scales, right? Okay, maybe there's a place for that. But much of the time, taking life really personally is a fast track to suffering. So as people progressively meditate, they have a more spacious sense of being. They abide increasingly, this is a key distinction here, as a person process, a particular body-mind process of unfolding and proceeding, like a particular wave that has meaning and value in the vast ocean, but that you have more and more of a sense of, your nature is water. You're actually abiding in the whole sea, and it starts feeling a lot more relaxed and connected, less isolated, less beleaguered, less separated, more of a sense of interdependence with other beings, more sense of compassion and support for justice for all other beings, not just human beings as well. That tends to happen as you have a more and more spacious sense of self, and the neural basis for that is supported in part by reducing activity in long-term meditators in the default mode network, which is pretty saturated with me, myself, and I, and increasing activity in more holistic or gestalt processing-oriented, more big picture, everything all together parts of the brain, and a greater sort of distributed sense of who you are as a person process that has rights and responsibilities, needs to be treated well, but with less and less sense that there's some kind of unified entity thing inside that you call me.
The information has been amazing. The material is fascinating. Everything you've outlined here today, it's a lot to take in. You've covered a lot of ground in a short period of time. Rick, it's been a pleasure. Thank you so much for taking time to be here with us today. We really appreciate you. We appreciate the work you do. And it's just been an absolute pleasure. Thank you.
Thanks for listening. If you enjoyed this talk and look forward to more from Rick Hanson, rate and leave a comment on Apple Podcasts. We'll post a longer practice from him in a future episode. Lion's Roar is an independent nonprofit foundation. Our mission is to communicate Buddhist wisdom and practices to benefit people's lives and to support the development of Buddhism in the modern world. Your ratings and reviews ensure that we rank on Apple Podcast charts, and ranking on the charts helps us spread the Dharma. You can always find more Buddhist wisdom on just about any topic at lionsroar.com, including free digital exclusives and pieces from Lions Roar magazine and from Buddha Dharma, the Practitioner's Quarterly.